Christopher, this is the Global Digest think tank group. You are our guest today, and I guess you still teaching at the university or what are you doing right now? Please.
Yes, I am an instructor of social sciences, social justice, and human rights at Arizona State University. And so I teach mostly undergraduate students, also graduate students, and we have a few different programs and degrees in Phoenix, Arizona.
It's great. I see you have expertise in, as you said, social justice and also genocide. Probably, if you follow Burmese cases, it was uh, it was genocide, the case at the ICJ, and a lot of human rights violation in is ongoing case in ICC and different other court like Argentina court and those things. And last time I told one of international lawyer, they said expert unless until the perpetrator, the oppressor, in case of Burma is a military junta and military general and the head of military, chief of army, and those directly involved, the commander in the field. So they should attend at the court. But if they don't want to attend, the court cannot verdict or cannot conclude, even though the victim has many cases and many evidences. That I heard from international lawyer, but I don't know details. I'm not expert on legal system, but I know you are expert on genocide, so probably you may know how's your opinion.
It gets messy. International politics is something of a fragile process in which we see the role of nation states have primacy, have the most significant role. And this is due to the concept of sovereignty, the
Right.
value of respecting each other's governments as being the highest authority that is available. And so when you're dealing with international institutions, whether it be the ICC or the ICJ, or essentially take your pick throughout the United Nations, other institutions, a government has the right to walk away from any discussion, to retract from any agreement. And that extends to the what's called the Genocide Convention, the intermittent and irregular process of international politics is more voluntary than mandatory for governments to participate in any particular process. So it's the exception to the rule when a leader or a group of perpetrators is brought to justice through any of the international justice system institutions, mostly because there has to be a change of government from within that home nation state to then extradite or maybe even hold the hearings within the boundary of that particular country. And so if the perpetrators are in power, then they're likely to stay in power more so than have any international court or institution usurp sovereignty, overthrow their power in their own country. So we're at a point in the development of international politics where there's a Western phrase, an English phrase of hurry up and slow down. We've put together a lot of the kind of details. We leaders in international politics in the most powerful countries and then many of their allies have put together a fabric of a system in which there are almost the performance aspects of politics, of governance, of even justice, but then the enforcement capacity is almost non-existent and very much about bilateral agreements from one country to the other country. And so if you don't have buy-in from specific governments, specific countries, then you don't end up with any meaningful outcome. And that
Right,
extends even, unfortunately, to human rights issues and cases of genocide as well.
right. So, Burmese case in 2017, there, there was internationally recognized genocide in Arakan State, Rohingya genocide. So, the Rohingya genocide is still ongoing, right? It's not yet concluded. Uh, in genocide, in academic field or in the legal system, how do you measure as genocide? It's a matter of the number of die or dead body. If there is only 10 people die or 20 people die, what you call as genocide, or uh, what other measurement? I mean, uh, intention, mainly intention of the perpetrator, the oppressor. In case of Burmese military, they it's a supposedly uh, that the court consider the military intentionally aim to whip out Rohingya from Burma, that probably as part of genocide. So can you clarify more detail in order to be eligible to be called genocide?
A serious matter for Burma, for Myanmar, for Rohingya, for these international institutions, for the countries that are interested in protecting civilians and their human rights. The clarification or the measurements, to some degree, there are objective standards. You mentioned a few of them. The process of intent is essentially at the core of how can you identify a case of genocide. You mentioned internationally recognized, and so
Right.
there have been. I'll get back to that in a moment. There have been some not strictly contradictions with internationally recognized steps, but some let's say some challenges in terms of what that process is versus how you can actually begin to actually submit a case into these international courts. When we get to the actual cases and identifying cases, we have very clear factors for looking at victims, or I should say potential victims, because there are a range of different types of crimes where it might be the case that you have anything ranging from, and they're not ranked as such, but it's more so just a kind of a collection of different types of crimes that the ICC and maybe the ICJ can look at and actually prosecute people, prosecute countries with. And they extend from the Geneva Conventions, traditionally speaking, that then built into what was this United Nations Convention on Genocide in 1948. With the convention, the hope was to differentiate between war crimes, what has
Right.
also now t- turned into a recognition of crimes against humanity, and then this other category of crime, which is genocide. And the reason why there is often a push towards the latter is that if a country has signed up to the convention, it's almost like an inversion of a military alliance, where if you have two countries and one of the countries is attacked in a formal military alliance, the second country has a duty to respond and provide military resources alongside that ally of theirs, the first country. And so that concept of war has become embedded in the genocide legal principles to the extent where if there are two countries who have signed up to the convention and they're looking to uphold the convention, then to remain within the remits of the convention and essentially kind of be in good standing with the court and with the United Nations. If any group in country A suffers from a potential crime of genocide, then it's on the other members of the convention, those other countries that have signed up, to provide assistance and respond to either the threat or well, more explicitly, the case of genocide. So for a case to be internationally recognized is a set of different thresholds on which you actually have other member countries agreeing that yes, genocide is taking place and therefore now we need to intervene. So this is where we get into the language of prevention and intervention. And the hope would be that no genocides take place ever and that we can prevent them. And that's where a lot of the emphasis has gone in terms of international politics, in terms of human rights and humanitarian projects for 80 years. However, when there is war, when there is violence, when there is organized political violence, and then you have suspected violations of law, crimes, the question then becomes, are we looking at crimes against humanity? Are we looking at war crimes? Are we looking at genocide? So what differentiates genocide from those other categories, all of which have a complex list of outcomes? It's almost always centered on, for war crimes and crimes against humanity, it's almost always centered on the mistreatment and violation of human rights of civilians in
Right.
multiple different contexts. When you're looking at genocide, this can include groups that have military forces themselves, groups that are maybe in realms of government as well as civilian capacity. And so there is a pretty clear way to look at who might be the targets, who might be the victims, what are the crimes, what are the actual the deeds, the acts of perpetrators. But after all of that, which is similar to crimes against humanity, war crimes, you've got this issue of intent. And when we get to intent, there has to be evidence that the suspected perpetrators have intended to, have planned to, have organized to then prosecute and carry out the destruction of a particular group and then carry out those plans against the particular group within a very limited set of outcomes. And we could talk about the outcomes if you'd like. We talk about the types of groups that have to be very specifically identified groups. And identification is another of these somewhat nebulous, slippery slopes. Intent is difficult, identity is difficult.
Can you also
Yeah.
identify by religion wise if they are intentionally Rohingya Muslim or intentionally or Christian? That that can we consider religious wise can be also fall into genocide category.
Yeah, yeah. So identifying your group, if the group itself identifies by nationality, ethnicity, religion, or race, those are the four categories of protected groups. And I say that phrase with an awareness that that's the hope of preventing genocide, that you would look at certain groups as being potentially vulnerable. And as a
Right.
result of those identifiers, there are categories in which you have power inequity or asymmetrical power within a country's society, within the way that the government or the military treats certain groups. And then there's that threshold at which you get the mistreatment of certain groups.
In Rohingya case, you point out, for internationally recognized genocide, it should be more than one country, involved in the case. So in case of Rohingya in Burma, Rohingya fled to the Bangladesh, and a lot of victims in Bangladesh, millions of victims. So Bangladesh government see and they have to deal with the refugee and those victims. They recognize that is genocide. So these are two state involvement. I don't know how much the level of Bangladeshi role, even though military junta has targeted particular Rohingya, but there are many places in Situate City or other, maybe in Yangon, probably they they did not kill, but we can see very clearly in case of the border with Bangladesh, they wipe out the whole villages. So this can you find the eligibility of uh, genocide?
Yeah, exactly right. So there are five criminal acts of genocide. People are more familiar with the first of these five, which is killing members of the group. The evidence is more explicit, more visceral, has a greater level of success in terms of prosecuting
Right.
with the first of the five. Other forms is where again we get this challenge. So there's multiple challenges, as I've mentioned, the concepts of intent on the perpetrator side and also identifying groups by specific categories on victim side. When it comes to the outcomes, the acts themselves, the criminal acts, then you have four others, four other types of act after killing members of the group. And I'm going to read from the convention so you can hear the text itself. We have causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. And so displacement during war, during conflict, during processes of ethnic cleansing in which one dominant oppressor society with its government, with its military, is pushing minority groups, members of minority communities, away and outside of the boundaries of any particular political region, whether it be a whole country or a region within a country. That is strictly speaking only displacement. By moving whole families and whole villages, you have the circumstances of which the children have not been separated from their families or from their own communities. And so it's almost a kind of unfortunate reciprocal process of when international organizations, international institutions, they put down on paper what means genocide. How can we protect people's human rights? How can we protect civilian communities whose governments are not doing their jobs of protecting their own civilians, but instead are actually committing crimes against them? Oftentimes, when you start to write it down, when you start to put it into the legal system, perpetrators, groups that discriminate, groups that attempt to eradicate minority groups that do not support the structure of a society, structure of a military dictatorship or government, well, then those perpetrators or potential perpetrators begin to look at the text of the legal system and consider what might be the loopholes, what might be the exceptions, what is close to but actually changes from what is strictly speaking an observable and identifiable case of genocide. So the displacement of whole families, of whole villages, of whole communities, then begin to figure out whether this is for the sake of the view of the ICJ and possibly the ICC at some point. You've got the process of saying, is this simply displacement, which is a violation of human rights, but for it to be genocide, you have to have not just displacement, but also then destruction. So there are these, in the middle of those five, you have two of the five, causing serious bodily and mental harm to members of the group, and deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Those two, I would say, is they are more often the acts that we see. However, they're also processes that fall under these many other types of human rights violations,
Right.
more so than genocide. And so for a country, for a court, for an international organization to charge either individuals or the government of a country with a crime of genocide, there has to be, unfortunately so, and it should not be in an ideal situation, it should not be the case, but it is the realities of legal systems. You have to have a kind of, not just a propensity of the evidence for the intent and then also the outcome, but also a kind of a beyond reasonable doubt threshold
Right.
where you have not just the court convinced, not just the people putting in the motions and applying for the cases to be heard, but to an extent where there is no strictly speaking jury system, but for the sake of outside observers, human rights organizations themselves, different humanitarian international organizations, looking at the case and looking at the evidence to say, oh yeah, that's really clear cut. It isn't politicized. It isn't a matter of using these institutions as a cudgel, which has been the case. And so we probably already identified 4 or 5 like deeply concerning aspects in the system we have that all need reform in some way. And so, yeah, we could most certainly identify Rohingya as a nation, as a religious community, as an ethnicity, and have those aspects and even the outcomes of many of these crimes, killing members of the group, causing physical and mental harm, forcibly transferring, like I said, because unless you have the extraction of the children into homes and communities that are not of their parents' lineage, their communities, then that one actually doesn't probably actually meet the standards of the court and the convention. I'm not all that familiar if there have perhaps been aspects of sterilization which would cause prevent births within the group. I'm not sure if that's the case in this community with Rohingya or not.
In overall, if you see Rohingya as a community, Muslim community it's between Burma and Bangladesh, and it is clear there is a group Muslim community, and military intentionally they try to wipe out the community, and many Muslim countries, including Middle East, Africa, and even non-Muslim European, majority they consider it's part of a genocide, but we have not yet done the court ICJ case, and we're still waiting ICJ connection to Muslim community. There is a Christian community in Burma, like Chin State is a Christian state. And in recent military coup, we can see clearly they bomb without any evidence. There is no any security threat or no danger, but the military has intention to wipe out the Christian by showing bombarding and innocent people and charges, because we know there are many evidence, in Christian state. So it is clear we can see addition to the Muslim community, the military junta is doing indirectly or directly genocide, as you mentioned, the category, it's become clearer, the intention of military, and the evidence are more, and many evidence are available now. I mean, it can also overlap. It can be crime against humanity. It can be human rights violation, also genocide. All these categories can be overlap, right? The bombing, killing innocent in Christian in Chin State, isn't that we can consider like that?
Well, you made me think there on some aspects of potential reform where we have to address the problem of intent, where what have we got from 1948 through to today? The convention itself has no follow-up on what intent means. And so in Western countries, in the kind of English common law system of legal prosecutions, there are 4 forms of intent. This extends from general and specific to also include constructive intent, and also transferred. Now, the first 3 forms are forms of intent in which you have to have like very concrete evidence of intent. What I mean by that, it would be a kind of issuing an order where destruction of a group is within the text itself, or within the order that's pronounced from an authority to the perpetrators in some way. With constructive intent, that's the idea of what you've been talking about, where we can see, where it is clear, where we have action, and action by itself, because the action can only really be caused by a very small select number of intentions. Right? So you mentioned a security threat. That might be one of the causes for a particular action. But for the cause to be the intent to destroy the group, a genocidal plan, well, therefore, you also need a way to cancel out the decision clarification as to, is this an act of war? Is this a counterterrorism process? And a lot of these justifications put by governments, put by juntas, put by military regimes, they will skirt around, for obvious reasons, they will skirt around the issue as to whether this is a genocidal plan. And so the idea of having concrete evidence of intent has become, over decades and over several cases, almost impossible to show general intent or specific
Right.
intent. Transferred, I'm not the expert on transferred intent. I'm not absolutely clear on how that works. But constructive intent sets a precedence that the courts have not gone to at any point yet. Maybe they might, but if that were the case, if that was the circumstance for the ICJ to use constructive intent as the new standard and set that precedent, we would have many, many cases all of a sudden, because the threshold at which we can clearly demonstrate and have it accepted by the court as having a genocidal plan, having intent to destroy the group. If we go by the actions to observe and identify intent, right, the planning before the action, well, then you have a whole range of different types of political violence, including warfare, that would also come under the scrutiny for applications into genocide court. So you've got a tremendous amount of political pushback from any country, any government that is involved in war in any shape or form, or attempting to subdue a security threat from some type of political opponent within its domestic borders, a terrorist organization, a rebellious
Right.
group, whatever the case might be. And so that's setting a different and quite transformative precedence that would be a new paradigm in international politics. It would open up a new era in which any country that seeks to go and use force in a military capacity would have to work, probably even alongside and with consultants from the ICJ in a preventative manner, to ensure that genocide does not take place, that there is no plan, that it is, strictly speaking, a legitimate security operation. And again, we're back to the kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back, whichever way you want to put it, the pivot central issue of sovereignty within these governments, where outsiders who are not within those local enclaves in a government, in the military, there's nothing to stop them. There's nothing to insist that they participate in such preventative manners when conducting these security operations. It is voluntary. And so you have a few different aspects where that might well become more of a norm, more of an expected behavior of militaries and governments. But in many, many parts of the world, there's no reason to do that, right? there's no political incentive for a military to work effectively to avoid stepping into the blurred lines of international law. Oftentimes, there are many cases of warfare where soldiers themselves are let loose on the civilians, commit
Right.
vast numbers of crimes.
In Burmese case, the Rohingya Muslim community, Muslim community was without there was intention by military and international community. They they agree upon that the military junta did intention to destroy. It's a part of genocide. Even the case was submitted by African country, one of African country and many Middle East Muslim country they support and many European country support that. So we can say that genocide case in Burma is very much internationally supported and accepted that military junta did. International community consider military junta did genocide. Connection to Muslim community now military committed again uh, whipping out Christian community. As I mentioned you in Chin State, clearly they destroyed churches and many Christian pastors and many leaders were killed. And even there was no clear security threat or no clear measurement of security. Imagine most after military coup, the rise of opposition, local militia, mostly they have only homemade guns. You can imagine. Can you say that homemade gun can be a threat for national security? They just, a kind of showing they did not agree with military coup. That is the main message that many opposition has shown by using homemade gun.
Yep.
And the way the opposition, most of the local militia, their weapon and their military involvement are not able to measure the level of threat of national security. There is no, even they don't have to prevent air jet fighter shooting. They don't have any significant weapon to consider there is national security threat in Burma, but it is clear they showing they disagree with the military coup and they dislike authoritarian system. They just want democracy that show what they have done by opposition groups. So, but military action, as we see the bombing without any evidences, and some villages, no arms group at all, but they blindly bomb and even artillery shooting. I don't know the court system. They will handle the case one by one, or is it possible they can handle all together cases in Burma? But I don't know. But they are on the way to genocide, if not totally genocide committed by military junta.
Yeah, it is. It is a tragic situation that we see unfolding and continue to unfold, and it's likely, as un- unfortunate it is to realize, it's likely to continue for several years. There's a few ways that we can imagine or consider, and perhaps there's some aspect of potential political pressure from outside forces
Right.
to assist the civilian groups. There is the challenge of interfering in the politics of a particular country's government. And so, as you were talking, I was thinking, what might happen next? What might be some of the recourses that could lead to some efforts of justice? The justice will likely not be complete, right? How do you make something whole after a case of genocide, after such tremendous destruction and multiple thousands of human rights violations of different individuals? An unknown number. I mean, you mentioned numbers at the beginning of our conversation, and numbers are not used as any particular form of measuring whether a case has reached that threshold of counting of genocide or not. That doesn't help the victims at all. That doesn't help the civilian populations who are
Which
under the
means
duress of surviving the violations and the
which
crimes. It
means
doesn't.
10 population or 100 population, any number that it can be considered genocide.
Well, it can be considered whether or
If
not it meets the threshold in a court. Then you
right,
get into the technicalities, and there is no
intention, right?
exactly there is no number, right? There is no number that will count as becoming a particular aspect in a non-legal, in a scholarly, in an academic form. We could talk about the concept of a massacre, where a planned set of murders that impacts five or more people, and it's not a hard and fast rule. It's just a kind of a general acceptance. If it's five or more, this is not an isolated incident. This is not an aspect of someone having temporary insanity and going on a killing spree to the point at which there are several people, and there's no real clear reason why we use that number for a massacre. So therefore, you could talk about, you could put this in the context of massacres that take place during a genocide. So massacres, the specific events that leads to the deaths, the killings of five or more people, that then is one event within a series of criminal events and acts,
Right.
at which point then you're talking about much more of that plan, much more of that action equals the intent to commit those crimes, and therefore you can then begin to put together a case at which it isn't an isolated incident or a massacre of one event or several events, but it's more of a systematic destruction of that particular targeted group.
In, as I mentioned, a lot of charges they form even hospital and school. Example, hospital. I mean, there are many hospital, no insurgent. Case of insurgent in some hospital without
Right.
weapon.
Yeah.
So these all are on the ground of humanitarian. But bombing hospital is also against, Red Cross, International Red Cross, humanitarian law as well, right? You talk
Geneva
about
Convention.
human right law and crime against humanity, genocide. Now it's also humanitarian law also violated, isn't it?
Yep. Yep. Absolutely right. And you made me think there in terms of what would be the threat where you have some cases where there might be insurgents or members of political groups that resist a hunter's authority as justified because of the human rights violations carried out by what can be seen as an illegitimate government. And as a result of those violations, it might be useful to consider how there are circumstances for preventing, but at this point it's about intervention. So the diaspora, the
Right.
people who have left their home country, will there ever be a time at which they will be able to return safely and reintegrate the Rohingya community in Burma, in Myanmar? That's a pretty, it's devastating to think about, but it's very unlikely, at least not in the short term. Perhaps in a generation, it might be a process at which there is an aspect of justice, of a new regime in authority in the country, with a return of the Rohingya community. But as you've mentioned, there's also now targeting of another minority group, or several indeed, but
Right.
having the common denominator of Christianity. And so we're seeing the regime go the other way to prevention and intervention, and indeed continue to target different groups. And so, therefore, perhaps
Of course.
military intervention, perhaps military resistance, perhaps some other force is necessary, where in every legal system, and this is what I was going to get into with the challenges of the legal systems that we have, in the Western societies and countries, and those are the ones that began to create what has become the international system, and it's changed over time for sure, as diverse groups have become involved in considering what is justice, how could a court function. But there's a distinct divide between the legacies of French international systems, colonialism, and legal processes, and the English common law, which is more associated with the American system as well. And the difference being that the court in the French system is actively pursuing some form of justice, is actively a part of the prosecution. Whereas in the English common law process, it is adversarial with two groups that are attempting to convince the judge and the judicial system in the middle. And
I
so the
see.
judge and the judicial system is neutral to the point of hearing different sides, to the point at which it says, okay, the scales and the balance of justice is this, and it's our job to rectify and recorrect the balance between the two parties. And so the concept of justice in the English common law and the American system, which has had a prominence in the international system,
I see.
with an aspect of the French system as well, that it is about figuring out what is an equality among the two parties, more so than actually dealing with the crimes committed by one of those parties,
Right.
in a comprehensive justice system. And so you have efforts to maybe bring along more of an active role of the judicial actors and institutions to assist one side more so than the other, the victims and those bringing the cases, bringing the charges, more so than the perpetrators. But that's again, it's a shift and a reform that is unlikely to happen anytime soon. However, and I would like to hear, maybe you can tell me, I don't know, are there local aspects of forms of judicial system in Myanmar, in Burma, in Rohingya communities that might well assist in how we could imagine a process of justice in the future in which Rohingya law or Burma law is the standard, is the process for prosecuting perpetrators and assisting with the recovery of victims? Is there such a thing? Is there maybe a unique local form of law that you're aware of?
I don't think so. Although
Right.
I'm not a legal background, but current under military junta, the legal system is not independent, and there is no uh, even they never process such kind of justice system for any crime for including Rohingya Muslim community or any human right violation in the past 70 years. They have a lot of human right violation, crime against humanity, but there was no any such kind of justice system ever done under military. As long as the military rule
Yeah.
under military system, it cannot be
Right.
happen in inside Burma justice system.
Yeah. Yeah. So then
Right.
maybe an outside system will assist,
Definitely.
and it would require, in my view, in my readings of multiple cases, there is either an internal process that overthrows the perpetrator regime and then installs a form of local judicial process to seek justice. And in other cases, it has been an outsider military force that has also ousted the perpetrator regime. And then the decision is to have either local forms of judicial process
There is
assisting,
no
right?
prospectus about overthrowing military
Yep.
because military did not want to give up. Even they don't want to uh, I mean fair discussion or negotiation or peace building. Even they don't want to do fair peace building. They still keep their position as before. They don't want to give up any interest or any peace. That is the problem of the mindset of military. Unless they change their mind or give up their position, and unless willing to do fair peace building or negotiation,
Yep.
I think that will not going to change in Burma and opposition, as you said, as we said, in terms of military weapon, nobody supply, that
Right.
will be difficult for overthrow military government. So in my view, according to public opinion, international community opinion, as we already said, Muslim community, African country, Middle East country, because now also involve Christian communities, so European and American also public opinion were concerned. They know more and more about military junta crime and inhuman action. So overall, international community they accept this ongoing genocide and crime against humanity and human rights violation, even humanitarian law violation. So I we can say international community accept Burmese cases multiple violation,
Yep.
including genocide. I don't know in American position, American as a Christian country, how's the public opinion? I guess many Christian they dislike military uh, destroying churches, hospital, and killing many Christians. Isn't that in America?
Absolutely, it is. There is a tremendous disconnect with the government and the society right now in the United States. been a fracturing of the goodwill, if you like, of the Christian denominations and societies. And I talk about the plural aspect of those communities because there's many. It is very diverse. There are groups who abide by the Ten Commandments and treat their neighbors well, and that's essentially how they practice their Christianity. Versus there's active missionaries who go and put themselves at risk in developing and authoritarian regimes, including if they were able to gain access to Burma, then they would be there too in a very prominent and public way. Sometimes there is an aspect of security of their own missionaries who go into different parts of the world. And so there is an aspect of protecting the identity and assisting alongside the humanitarian, really escape routes to assist people to leave the conflict zones, to leave the regions where the communities are under threat, and relocate into a kind of harbor of sanctuary or safe haven elsewhere in the world. And so there are lots of different ways in which people are assisting. It isn't so much a justice issue, though. It's more so about humanitarian efforts, aid work to provide immediate relief to individuals, families, communities, entire social groups who are at risk, if not already subject to these crimes and are survivors of them. So there, we have a significant amount of work to do to reconnect the state in the United States, the government, with its foreign policy, with its view of politics in the international community and the society.
Next year,
Right.
after
Yep.
Trump officially become president, do you think Trump will do more action? Because Trump was elected because Protestant Christian,
Yep.
poor vote this time. A lot of they support Christian believers in America. So Trump himself also Protestant Christian, and well, Trump will be very concerned about Burmese Christian community under persecution because many Muslim community concerned by Muslim country,
Yeah.
or Christian community, maybe American could be
Yeah.
concerned.
I think that there is a reform agenda that could take place that would be more aligned with Democrat values, except when we get to this foreign policy thing. And this is where the shift has come. And I would say this is why Trump is now due to be the president more so than Kamala Harris, because Democrats have lost root with the people in many ways. The working class, regular American citizen who works for their town, who works for their family, who's invested in their local communities. And that's the point I was making. The state, the government, Washington, D.C., the federal government has been very, very concerned with taking advantage of political opportunities throughout the world to enhance themselves, enrich themselves, the leaders themselves, political elites. And so there's this huge disconnect between local, regional, and to some extent even state level politics and communities, and then the federal government in Washington, D.C. And the political elites have not necessarily really done themselves many favors to reconnect back with genuine American concerns, genuine problems that American citizens deal with regularly in their own lives. And they have political elites have been far more interested in back scratching and doing favors and political trading with other political elites in other countries. And that veneer of international politics, that kind of somewhat cynical view of the realities of power and how power functions, they've lost touch with who they're supposed to represent. And so, for the sake of talking about Christian values, the population in America, people who do not also identify as Christian, they uphold many of the same cultural beliefs, the same types of behaviors that we could classify as Christian values. And it does come down to humanitarian values, humanitarianism. And so we might see a switch in this next presidency and the administration of the federal government working towards greater improvement on a humanitarian front. At the same time, it is the American government, it is the American military. It's the most powerful and expensive single thing that's ever existed. And
Right.
that kind of power and that kind of investment, there's a question as to who does it represent? Is it going to represent American taxpayers and look out for American interests, the interests of American citizens? If so, then there is an opportunity to talk about shared values with Christian communities, with other communities that hold similar values across the world.
Right.
But in my own view, I think that American federal politics are going to be far more centered on domestic policies, interior within America, and they're going to be looking for, and Trump's speeches have already talked about this, and the previous administration from 2016 to 2020 said and did a lot of the same things that he said he's going to do again. In terms of getting greater participation from other major powers in the world.
So definitely it should be changed. I mean, as we discussed, the military must change, change in order to able to handle all these Rohingya Muslim community issue and the whole country issue. So in America, Republican is mostly backed by Christian, and many vote Christian probably. In that point of view, Trump will be very considerate about Christian within domestic as well as the Christian community in Burma. If Trump willing to do action, he can do many things. Say if Trump send just one aircraft carrier or one bomber, it can finish in Burmese case. It's not difficult if military in military way solution. Because last time I know Trump seriously he told all the dictator whenever he met, whether North Korea or Middle East, if you are not changed, if you are making trouble, especially against America, we will destroy with very powerful weapon. Then many dictators they quiet. So that is example. At least Trump can give a warning to Burmese military junta. I will destroy with very powerful weapon. It might be changed. American public opinion already spoiling. Trump can do just action, and there is a capacity. I mean, my point is that, and even before action, just warning can be also enough because the dictator might be changed if there is just such kind of warning given by Trump. That is my concern, the possibility. But inside domestic politics better than me. So
Well, I mean, I like the sentiment, and I would hope to see a different form of enforcement. And what I mean by that is we have the court, we have the ICJ, we have ICC, we have the United Nations, we have peacekeepers, we have United Nations military
right,
forces, and yet we don't and they have to respect again. a government's sovereignty. If they are to intervene in a country's borders, they have to be invited in. And that's something that I think has to change. And you mentioned a carrier, some kind of warship in international waters. That might actually be something that the United Nations wants to look at, to have that
Right.
capacity to provide a deterrence, to provide the threat of use of force if conditions are not met that actually respect human rights and uphold the government's duties to protect one's own
Right.
population of civilians. But Trump, I would argue, is not going to send a ship because it would set a precedence of stretching American forces out into responding to threats that are dispersed from American interests. And what I'm pointing out there is, imagine the great game of global politics where Russia and to some extent China are attempting to overburden American military
Russia also
capacity.
Christian country.
Okay, so maybe Russia then might be able to provide some greater force or influence on Myanmar, on Burma. But my point here is to redeploy forces in one part of the world or another part of the world. If that begins to become the norm, then it's actually quite not easy, but there is a potential for an enemy country or an alliance, a collection of enemy countries to stretch American forces to the breaking point where it becomes too expensive, it becomes too costly, and that leads to a collapse, kind of like what happened with the Soviet Union, where they're just too stretched across different parts of the world and cannot deal with their own internal issues. And I think that that's where we'll see this change. Now, the argument, therefore, is okay, how do you build an enforcement capacity from an international perspective? From NATO is overly politicized and I think needs to really tremendously reform. But a collection within the United Nations where there is genuine military deterrence, there is a threat, there is a capacity of a military intervention, and it is an internationally representative group. We've kind of got that here and there in piecemeal ways, whether that be NATO, whether that in history's examples be Warsaw Pact, but some kind of coalition at an international level that is not in favor of one group or one country, but is in fact assisting with all of the members of the groups. And we're yet to see that play out in any particular case in a way which hasn't actually increased civilian casualties and increased civilian hardships. And the
Right.
test case for that was Iraq with 2003 and the concept of the Saddam Hussein regime violating its duty to protect civilians, the right, the responsibility to protect concept in international law was tested, and the United Nations agreed to an extent in the 1991 Gulf War, where you had concerns from Kuwait and also Kurdish groups with Iraq's governments and its violations.
As we discussed, the Rohingya Muslim community that already condemned by international community, and repeatedly again, the military junta committed crime, indiscriminately killing the Christian community this time. I mean, I'm just telling about Christian community case in Chin State, but they are, the whole country has under conflict, like that, not just in Christian state, like even their own Buddhist state and Buddhist community in like Sakai, Magwe, they they killed and they wiped out many villages, but I cannot categorize simply them as Buddhist community because they don't have clear I mean, difficult to categorize. But in Chin State, we can categorize it's clearly Christian community, and Rohingya is clearly Muslim community. That's why I'm just able to categorize.
Yeah.
But there are many, uh, you know, crime committed by military without categorizing. Maybe it may simply fall into the human rights violation or crime against humanity, war
Yeah.
crime in many part of the country, So it's been increasing military junta is violating. That's why we are repeatedly arguing military junta should give up, or even they don't want to totally give up. They can at least able to give up 50%, you know, or able to do negotiation with the opposition. This time is a critical time. Military should accept that, because the military junta seem they don't want to accept the real situation. They still want to be, proud and a kind of a unchangeable mentor, military mentor. They don't want to engage, or they don't want to fair discussion. So at least according to current conflict situation, they should be give up at least 50%, if not totally they give up. We don't
Mm.
we don't think they will give up totally, but at least 50%.
Yeah.
Never they want to give up. That is the problem of military uh, junta in Burma.
Yeah.
And you said about international system and UN troop. That is very official way of international UN
Hmm.
system.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, deterrence, the threat of an external intervention can go a long way and often does. I also think that there needs to be support for the groups from a domestic viewpoint, where we can imagine the the concept where one day there is some form of reform in the junta, in the government, in the military. That will not happen by itself, and it will also take a very long time. And so there's unfortunately almost a generational process of rectifying some of the wrongs and not all of the wrongs at all. And so there's a kind of multifaceted number of acts that we would hope to see to stop the violence, to reintegrate Rohingya communities into Myanmar, into Burma, also provide assistance for communities living outside in different other countries. And that may well be a way to begin the political leveraging Muslim communities in other major powers that can provide some kind of political pressure, some kind of presence with deterrence through a potential military intervention, or at least the threat of a military intervention. You mentioned Russia. Russia is Christian and also Muslim. And so maybe you might see Russia begin to step into some greater role in international influence. I don't think so, because I think that they already have a number of different conflicts and interests to consider. I think it's more likely, like I was suggesting before, that it might come through the United Nations. It might be a coalition of several groups in several countries. Maybe Trump's federal government administration can provide some incentives for greater cooperation, including adversaries right now. You might see a tremendous shift there. That is a potential where there are very unique first time agreements at the international level, which includes several of these particular cases: greater protection of Christians, is on the agenda within the domestic politics in terms of Christian values, Christian identities, Christian communities. Christian majority populations at local levels have felt threatened and under threat and under attack in the American context, not to anything like war crimes or crimes against humanity or genocide, but in terms of discrimination and in terms of social customs amongst secular people, secular institutions, and then Christian populations. So you might well see a greater
By the way, even
cooperation.
if there is a strong faith and increase in Christian faith inside America can also reflect
Yeah,
their
exactly.
willingness to support in the overseas Christian community too. I mean not maybe very directly, but probably
Right.
indirectly, at least
Yeah. Greater cooperation for sure. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. I think so. I think it would likely need to become something that is actually more influential in the international organizations. So in the United Nations, for instance, recognizing the shared values across and within specific religious groups. I think that could actually be a tremendously helpful way to increase cooperation across political divides, across these boundaries and within these countries, including Burma. But I also would just want to finish as well by suggesting at the same time, like you said, some form of military deterrence, some greater capacity for enforcement. And so, in all of these legal systems we've talked about, at the national level, at local levels, when there is a judicial system and a court, you have the police, you have the enforcers of the law. At the international level, we have the courts, but we don't yet have this enforcement capacity. And
Right.
so that's the next step that needs to actually manifest, that we need to work towards building a functional enforcement capacity that can prevent and also can intervene, as well as also help to seek justice after such crimes have taken place.
Right. So, if we see overall the about on the side of international community, including Muslim country and Christian countries, even I mean African, European, and Middle East. Most of them they already recognize its ongoing genocide in Burma. Definitely, it is crime against humanity done by military junta and multiple thousands of human rights violations. International community recognize public opinion. They accept that there is a military junta violation. So, as you said, the problem of international system, UN system is enforcement. That enforcement is, legally is still uh, on the process. ICJ and ICC, we are waiting for the international court procedure and also enforcement. The world's strongest uh, enforcement powerful country, America, Russia. Russia, if they want to help Christian community, they can do that. I mean, if they do, they can go ahead. Russia can prevent it and help them, and or any kind of military kind of enforcement they can support. Then other will be support Russia. If Russia were not willing to do, then Russia should quiet, or then Americans step in, then American let them do. So either one should do, then I mean at least it can. And for Burmese case, not that. big deal, you know. It's not difficult for superpower to deal, you know. Just one aircraft drop a bomb and finish. It can done everything. The junta military has nothing to say, you know. That I mean, superpower can do easily. My point is in come of enforcement. So that is the thing. Russia, if they don't want to do, they should quiet and let American or European or other international community enforcement should implement it. That international community were willing to see such thing, I think. So for conclusion, uh, anything you want to say, Chris?
Um, I think that we have covered comprehensively this case, and hopefully we can see some more positive outcomes. And yeah, I'm fairly optimistic that we will see a greater recognition of human rights once we have some aspects of those religious beliefs, something of a change away from purely technical secular politics that really sustains human values beyond the material and does incorporate emotional as well as spiritual aspects. There are traditions of this for thousands of years where different groups who have different habits, different practices of worship, but have some aspect of a shared value of a higher power, of a divine force, increase their cooperation in respect for those shared values. And I think we've already tested secularism to the extent where you need that other aspect that brings in and helps to cooperate and build different support mechanisms within groups that are religious as well as those that are not. And politics in a lot of parts of the world haven't, that's the divide often in the international arena. And so I would agree with you. Yes, absolutely. If we can bring different groups in, different major powers in, and have greater cooperation as a result of those shared values that extend to include spiritual and religious beliefs as well as purely secular aspects of respecting human dignity, then I think that that's a positive place for us to finish on.
Thank you very much, Chris. We have a good discussion today.